Hello, welcome to this next Substance Designer tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to make a tiled texture, or a tile texture, not a tiling but a tile texture, which is also tiling. So what we need from that is a few shapes, and we need something to arrange them. So let's start off our substance graph, and I'll just go for metallic roughness graph, and I'll call it rough tiles, because I'm going to break the edges. Whoops, let's take caps lock off. There we go. So 2048 by 2048, yeah, we'll do that for start. Relative to parent, new package, and OK. So once that's done, let me just rearrange my window a little bit. We're going to use a tile node, whoops, and we want the tile sampler. That comes in like this, and it looks a bit intimidating, but it's okay, it's not too bad at all. And what we want to do for this is plug some shapes into it and have them go around. So let's press space and add a shape and plug that into the top, and you'll see nothing changes to start with, because we need to select the tile sampler, and then under pattern we need to switch it from square to pattern input. And now it's taking this square instead of its default square essentially. And if I scale this down, for example, we'll see that it does the same down here. So let's build this using the diffuse texture, so we can see what's going on. So I'm just going to scale this back up again, and then we'll pull this to one side, and now I'm going to rough up the edges. So I'm going to do that excuse me, with a slope blur. So a slope blur grayscale. We'll plug the square into the top, and we'll plug the output into the input for the tile sampler. And then we want to rough up these edges, and we'll use a purlin noise for that. And for that purlin we'll then plug into the bottom. Now you'll see as default it really messes it up, so what we need to do is just reduce the intensity until it's just doing the edges. And if we go to our purlin noise and increase the scale, you'll see that roughness gets finer and finer, the larger or the smaller the scale is. At some point in time it's too much, so I'm just going to take it somewhere around there. Okay, so that's okay for that, but it's not that exciting. So we're going to put some variation across the tile front. So I'm going to press the space, and then let's use a spots, or black and white spots, and then we'll pick a blend. So space and blend, and then we'll plug our input and output nodes in, or both our input nodes in rather. And you'll see it just looks like the top one first, because that's on a copy blend. And if I reduce the opacity, you'll see we get a little bit of a blend in. I want it to be quite subtle, so yeah, somewhere around there I think. And let's then plug that in. And if we go and have a look at our output here, we should see that we've got every single tile is exactly the same, which is completely boring and not what we're here for. So let me just move that out of the way for a moment. Now on the pattern options for the tile sampler, we have a pattern input number. Now this is the number of tiles we're going to plug in, number of shapes we're going to plug into here. So we can up this pattern number, and because there's nothing plugged into these new inputs up here, we'll see we're getting a checkered pattern going on. I'm just going to reduce this tiling amount because it's not very helpful at the moment. There we go, we'll have 8 by 8. We can zoom in and see what we've got. I might just plug this into the normal as well, and that will give us a little bit of extra information. Now I think the blend here is not strong enough, so let me, there we go, now we're getting some rough tiles. See, it's really starting to get a texture on the surface there. We can always update spots if we want finer detail, so increasing the scale, changing the disorder, even the roughness will have an effect. So just experiment until you get to where you want to. Now what we've got to do now essentially is make 4 more tile shapes, and that is going to make my graph very, very noisy. So what we're going to do in the next one is we're going to make a subgraph of this substance, which is going to keep our shapes. So I will talk to you then. Okay, so just one little tweak before I move on. I notice I've got some kind of quite complex little patterns going on in here which I don't want. So on the slope blur, I'm just going to increase my samples until that goes away. This is nice, kind of ridged and chipped. I like that, that's good. So we'll go with that one. Oh, I've got a little bit up here, look. So let's increase the samples. Yeah, I just want it, I don't want any of that really, it's too noisy. Okay, so if I select this lot and right click on it, I can extract it to a subgraph, or at least I thought I could. Copy clipboard, expose parameters, there we go, create graph from selection, and I'll call this tile shapes. There we go, and now you can see that we have a little tile shapes thing over here, and if I delete these and drag and drop that in, nothing will happen because I need to put some parameters in. So if I go to double click on the tile shapes here, all I need to do is put an output node on this graph, and I'll plug that in there, and then when I go to the domain graph, see, I now have an output which I can plug into my shape, and there we go, we have our shapes. Now the bonus here is that if I come here, and I'll just name this tile 1 before I go further, so tile underscore 1, there we go. That was just for this output. Yep. I can copy these and then paste them. So if I Control C, Control V, or Control D in fact, just on its own, and then let these all calculate, I'll get a second shape. And you'll see it's called tile 2 because it's named it nicely. And then we'll go back to our roughness tile, and now I have a second output which I can plug into my second slot. So going back to my tile shapes, all I really need to do is make some changes. So for example, my blur slope might be okay, but if I change my noise, I will get a different result. And now we can go to perhaps our blend and or our black and white spots and change this, and that will be a different result. And when I go back to our rough tiles by double clicking, we should see that there are different shapes all around. If I unplug the top one, see, we have the one shape here, and if I then plug it back in, we have the second shape there. Not much difference between them currently. Doesn't look like much difference, but we're going to develop that and add some good stuff to it. So what do I want to do now? Well, I just want to adjust my tile sampler here to get this looking more like a tile. If I go to size, we'll see that size overall Oops, let's move that in. We've got X and Y and scale is set to 0.8. I'm going to set that to 0.95, or I might even set it to 0.99 to get them real close together, so it starts to look like actual tiles and not, you know, not having things too far away from each other. Okay, so if I go back to our tile shapes graph, I can now repeat this and do some different things with it. So again, Control D will give me the third tile shape, and Control D will give me a fourth tile shape. And back in our main graph, I can plug those in. There's no differences at the moment because we haven't updated it, but we'll soon fix that. Okay, so we could use an entirely different set of nodes here to fill a shape. For example, I could take this shape and make it slightly larger. We could change this noise out for a different kind of noise. Oops, space, and I'm going to look for a Gaussian. So let's go Gaussian spots 1 and plug that in and see what that does. So that gives us something a bit different. I think my thing's a little bit too big, so let's make it 0.95. There we go. We could use a different either a different set of parameters in the spot color, make it rougher or smoother. We could update our disorder, and similarly here we could do the same thing. Could use a different noise. Let's take another spots. Whoops, space. I'll just use black and white spots for now. Pop that in there. Let's have a look, see what it looks like. Yeah, that's much finer. I can increase or decrease the intensity as required. Change my samples, and the lower the samples, the rougher it's going to be. Essentially, it's like having, you know, multiple pictures and then interpolating them all together. This black and white spots, let's change that out for a different one. Well, let's try a Gaussian. We'll have a Gaussian spots 1 and plug that in there, and there we go. And now if we go back to the rough tiles, we have, yeah, a random set of tiles on our wall which we can, you know, use to make a texture. So we're going to have a crack at sort of some of that next. We're probably going to add some more variation to the tiles first. I'd like some cracks, something like that, something a bit random. Nothing too extreme, but yeah, we shall see. So I'll talk. Okay, so before I get to varying the shapes, I'm just going to tweak the tile sampler to get some you know, variation in it just from the sampler. So one of the things is rotation. All of our tiles currently are unrotated. They're all pointing in the same direction that they started at. And let me get the pattern up. I'm just going to put this down a little lower. Maybe 4, not 78, 4 by 4. Whoops. There we go. I hope this will make it easier to see when the rotation happens. So normally you'd think I'd go down to rotation and I'll put a random rotation on, and that works, but in this case that's not what I want. What I want is just to rotate them 90 degrees, you know, or, you know, what we're trying to say, multiples of 90 degrees. And that is done actually on the pattern side. You'll see we've got all of our options down here. One of them is rotation random, and if I just start to add this up, you should see, perhaps in this window, some tiles start to flip, and that then gives us a little bit of variation among tiles. Yeah, because even though the tiles, we've got 4 different tile shapes to work with, if each of them is oriented in the same way, you will pick up the patterning. But if you can rotate some of them, then it becomes less obvious. So also in here, we've got our pattern input number, of course, we've got a rotation there, we've got symmetry random. We can go into size and mess with that. I think I'm going to really reduce it actually. Where's size gone? It's down here. So let's make that 1. You'll see that's closed up the kind of grouting between them, and given me quite a nice look. Saying that, it might be a little bit wide, and that will be in our tile shapes, because it's the noise of our tile shape that's giving us that look at the minute. So let's go zoom in here and see what I can do. So my tile size here, if I put that to 0.98, that's a little bit better. It is going up to the edge, but we can do something about that in a moment or two. Perhaps I will actually take it down just a teeny tiny bit, perhaps to 0.96, just to maintain that edge. So we've got a tiny little edge going on. So similarly for the other ones, I'll probably do the same thing. In fact, a lot of these shapes are exactly the same, so I don't really need all of these unless I'm planning to vary the size of various ones. So let me just plug these back in, if I can see from here, my old man eyes. There we go. So let's go back to the main graph to see what that looks like. See, they've closed up nicely, look a bit more like tiles. There are some issues there, but we'll deal with that as we go. Okay, so also on the tile sampler, what have we got? We have size, we've done position. So we can offset positions. I wouldn't want to necessarily in this, but if you wanted to, say, put a 0.5 offset on, you'll get more of a brick-like kind of look. And also, as rotation, we have colour. So colour, we can increase put a mask on rather, and the mask random will take out certain tiles. Probably better if you've got more tiles, but let's have a look. And then down here we have our colour random. Now this is going to, it's probably easier to look at the actual node result itself now. If I just double click on that, you'll see now I'm getting various shades of grey coming in, and the higher I go, the darker those shades will become. So just a tiny variation is nice, just to give it that little bit of extra change. Because it's random, on the on each cell, it's not going to stick to one tile input, it's going to scatter it around, thus changing the difference between the two. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to size now and just really tweak it just a teeny tiny bit. So we've got 1 here, and I'm going to put it at 0.99, and that's just going to put a teeny tiny gap between then. There we go. Okay, so next then I want to introduce some shapes that maybe repeats of other shapes, but will have other features on them. So we'll do that next. Okay, so let's add another shape variant and go to our tiles here, and I'm going to copy this bottom one with Control D. There we go, and I'll click on the end to recalculate them all. And now we're going to add in something which is going to add some cracking in. So first of all, I need a shape, and I find a good shape for this is cells. Cells 4, it's got some nice kind of variation to it. And after that, if I drag this noodle out, we can type edge detect, and we'll pick up edge detect, and you'll see that with those settings it's not very great, and that's because basically our cells are too small. We need to bring the scale of this right back down, somewhere around there I think. And now if I double click on edge detect, you'll see that that's got some edges in it. We have a roundness option which we can do to really round them off or really make them sharp. I'm going to put a tiny bit on, and then from that we're going to use a slope blur. So if I type slope and plug that in the top, and we need a noise to rough it up, so we'll have our old friend the purlin and plug that in the bottom, and of course it comes in way too intense, so I'm going to dial that back until I get what I want. So that is a little bit much, and that just indicates that my cell size is too big. So I'm going to take it down to 1. One's obviously too low. 2 perhaps, and that's going to give me something a little less busy. We can adjust this, just change the disorders around, change the scale around, but it really does need to be quite low. That's quite a nice one for this particular. So now we've got a cracked texture which we can overlay with our tile here. So let me drag this back so I've got some space, and drag this one back, and now I want a blend. We'll have that in the top and that one in the bottom, and then leave it on copy and just adjust that until it just starts to come in. So if I go all the way, I'll just have the underneath, and if I go too far the other way, I won't see it at all. So let's plug that into our tile 5 output, and then we can go back to our original graph. We now have another output here. I could go to the tile sampler, and under the pattern settings I can set that to now 5, and then I'll pop that one in there. There we go. So now we can see we've got this tile down here which is not only chipped away at the edge, but has got some cracks in it as well. You can spend more time than I'm doing, obviously, refining these shapes, and getting the things really right. You could try different modes. You could try multiply instead, and dial back that opacity. Yeah. So just try and experiment. That's all you need to do, really. Plug things together and see what happens. That's my general process. It's just about not forgetting, which I do quite often as well. Excuse me. Okay, so let's go back to the rough tiles. There we go, and that's what our cracked tile looks like since we changed the blend mode and worked that way. Okay, so we're not seeing too many tiles at the moment, so let's increase that. I might put this on a flat plane actually. I much prefer it. Plane high res. There we go. And then we'll up our X and Y amount. And there you can see, how it's arranging itself. You can even see some of the normals with the angles of light there. I could also put this into our height map, and that will give us a bit more of an idea. Okay, at any time of course you can come back to the sampler mode and just update your random seed, and you'll see that the tiles move until you can then get some more pleasing patterns, shall we say. I noticed I had a lot of cracks there all in one place, which I didn't like, so I've just updated my random seed a bit until I'm happier with how it looks. I think 7 was the one. Yep, there we are. Okay, so it's a little bit extreme in places at the moment. I might have a look to see how I can resolve that. I think it'll probably be some sort of blur. These are turning out more to be really rough, much rougher than I intended them to be. So yeah, I'll have a little go at that next and see where we get to. So okay, so let's go back to our tile shapes and have a look at our actual shapes. So if I zoom in a bit, you'll see this shape is quite rough and quite jaggedy. I think I've gone a bit overboard with that one, frankly. So let's see what we can do about that. So if I take the intensity down, it's going to basically it is going to rough up the edges, but not necessarily quite so much. And if I change the scale of my Perlian noise, if I select on that one, double click and then select there, I should be able to see what happens as I just change this scale. So the lower I go, the larger the scale. So you can either choose to have very large details or very small ones. I'm quite keen on small, but perhaps not that small. Somewhere around there, I think. There we go. So similarly on the other ones, we can do much the same. So I can bring my intensity down on this one, adjust my scale to get something that's a little less on the mad side. So intensity down, increase your scale, there we go. I quite like that one as it is because I used a slightly different method, and this one again, yeah, different method. Actually, it's the same one. Right, I'm also not really happy with this blend. It's too black on the cracks. I don't want them to be quite that black. I think I'll go back to the copy and just have them quite subtle. There we go. So let's go back to our tile graph. Now it's a little bit more refined. A little bit, not a huge amount, but it is slightly more refined. Okay, so what are we going to do next? Well, I suppose we ought to colorise it, hadn't we? So yes, we'll colorise and create the roughness map in the next one, I think. Okay, so what we need is a gradient. So if I type in gradient, and we'll click gradient map and plug our output from our tile sampler into that, and I'll plug that into our base colour. So as we've done before, we've got the gradient editor down here, and if we click in there, we can start to map colours. And I'm going to make my window a bit bigger here and use this as a preview. Okay, so if I click in here, I want this to basically clamp an area to darker colours. Well, to the darker colours in the black and white map. So let me change this colour, and I want this colour to be a kind of a browny grey sort of what am I trying to say, ground colour essentially. And you'll see that's come in there, but I want to bleed it out a bit because this is picking up just black. There's no pure blacks in these. So what we can then do is just drag this a little bit further over, and you'll see it starts to bleed. Just starts bleeding into the other parts of the tile. And if I select both of these, it will bleed out even more. So I'm just trying to get it to a point where it's, you know, not just a straight line, but is also, you know, not far off. It's not a straight line, but it's not filling the whole gap. So from this grey point then to here is everything else. So if I grab this grey point and set it to white, everything will be white, and it's lost all of our lovely kind of variation, although some of it will still be captured in the height and the normal map, of course, but we don't necessarily want that. So this one I'm going to set as a kind of a midish, just above mid grey, somewhere around that point, and then I can add in further keys just to vary it as we go. Now you don't have to use white, of course, you could use any colour you like. I'm just sticking to white because, well, white tiles, they're a bit classic, aren't they? There we go, let's just clamp that down a bit. You should still be seeing some variation on the flat because of the variation we entered in earlier. I might just feather that back a little bit. There we go, just to merge those in a little bit. Okay, so that's the colour map, and again you can spend a lot more time on it than I have, of course, but it really depends upon, you know, what you're after. So let me close that one for now and get rid of this uniform colour because we don't need that anymore, and then split that down so we can see a bit more of our graph. So we're also going to want a roughness map. Now this is going to make everything very, very rough because, you know, you can see here that all of these colours are either very, very dark or very, very light, and they're also the wrong way around because we want the grout, you know, the gaps between to be light, so that they don't reflect, and the tiles themselves to be at least semi-shiny. So let me select the noodle, press space and type invert, and we'll invert that initially. Now I'm running out of space to look. Now we've got something which is sort of the other way around. I see there is some shine there. You can just see the environment reflecting, but it's not enough. I want more. Let me delete this uniform colour. So I'm going to put a levels node after it, and with this levels node I want these greys to be darker. So if we grab the mid-tone there, the gamma, I can drag that down to make it as shiny or as matted as we like, and they are very shiny at the moment and don't look very tiley at all, but that's okay. Take it back a bit. I want a bit of variation. Don't want them all to be super shiny, and I don't want them all to be super matte either. There we go. See, these cracks are lighter than the surroundings, so that will be a nice kind of variation. Some of the dots are going to show us variation. Yeah, yeah, it's all good. Okay, so what else have we got here? We've got the ambient occlusion. Let's delete this one here. If you want to use ambient occlusion, we can press space, type in ambient and pick the HBAO. I'll plug that one in there, and then we'll plug this into the ambient occlusion. And that's going to really darken up some areas, because it's assuming that, you know, no light's getting there, therefore, you know, you won't be able to see anything. But we can adjust the height depth down and adjust the radius down until we get something that we like. So you can see I'm going to really low values now. Really low. Let's try 0.005. There we go. Okay, so I've actually ended up more something like concrete slabs, which is okay. And I might actually just rename the video concrete slabs, just to make it look like I know what I'm talking about. But yes, that is more or less it. I'm going to stop this video now, and then when I come back we'll have a look at seeing what else we can do with this. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so pretty much all of our variation is based on the fact that we've got 5 different tiles, but we don't need to completely rely on that. If I just pull this backwards for a second, I'm going to put an overall warp on it, and I'm going to use a multi-directional warp. There we go, multi-directional warp grayscale, and we'll pop that into the top, and then we'll need some sort of noise here. So yeah, I keep wanting to use Perlin, but I'm going to use perhaps just Gaussian. There we go, and I'll pop that in there, and you'll see that that starts to warp it all over the place. It's even broken some bits up. So I'm just going to pull the intensity back a bit, and that's going to give us some reasonably subtle overall changes. If we bring the scale down on this and then have a look and perhaps increase the intensity till we can see it happening, you can see, you know, what it's doing. Where, you know, the very white values are, it's warping this quite a lot, and I'm just going to draw that back a little bit, just now giving some overall, you know, variation to the texture. So if that's now my basis, I can press shift and click on this output here and plug it into our new output there, and that will dial it all up and put it in the right place. There we go. Let's pop that down there, and just for neatness I'll pop that one under there. But we can also then go for these other maps to put some variation in, and the one I'm really thinking of is the roughness map. So if I add a texture in here, let's pick a grunge. I'm going to pick this grunge map 4 because it gives quite a nice overall pattern. I've accidentally plugged that in there, so let me just pop in a blend quickly and pop that over the top and that in the bottom, and then plug that into the roughness. And now we're going to adjust this blend. So as you can see, we've got kind of spots going all over everywhere. You know, regardless of it being a tile, it's going across tiles, it's staining, it's, you know, doing that sort of thing. And if I go into the grunge map, we could perhaps adjust some of this. Take the contrast, and that will give us more basically variation. Or I could really up the contrast and it will be very, very sharp. Similarly with the balance, if I go up it's going to brighten, and if I go down it's going to darken. And we can have a look, see what effect that has on our roughness map. Let's adjust the opacity a bit. So now I've got some kind of splotchy, watery, kind of grungy, horrible, dirty stains on there. which we can't see because, well, basically we haven't got the light. We haven't got the right light for it, at least. Let me switch this out, perhaps for a different light set. Under 3D view in your library over here, you've got the environments. So this is quite a bright environment. Let's pop that in. There's quite a lot of light there. So yeah, that's too much light. I expect we're going to either find too much or not enough. This has got quite a soft directional component to it. Yep, not seeing too much. It is there. I know it's there because this is the roughness map, and the roughness map is, you know, quite varied, so there is going to be a lot of variation on it. Let's see if I can do some other things. The colour map, let's update the colour map. White is boring, you're right. So what might we have? A blue tile maybe? Like a somewhere around there. I'm going to copy this value and then go to my next key and paste it in, and then just take the V scale down a little bit. And similarly here, just going to adjust it a bit with the V scale, and maybe even take some of the saturation out. And then this last one, plug in the value, adjust and adjust. Yeah, it doesn't look quite so horrid and glaring. And now we can see the variation map. Of course we can. Another of John's decisions is proven to be terrible. Okay, so there we go. We have a pretty nice map. If you want to put a pattern on the tiles, then I would do it back here under our tile shapes, and yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to show this is because you can reuse it. Now, if you save this material, which I'm going to now, where is it? Save all. I'll call it Rough Tiles, which it is. If I open Rough Tiles, I can clear my substance graph here and just start again using these tile shapes. I suspect that I could even just add this substance into another substance and still take the outputs from here. And I hope you can see that, you know, I've done it with some tiles, I've roughed them up, it makes the whole thing a bit neater. If you can imagine, you know, this graph would have all of this in, which would make it quite hard to read. Whereas, you know, I've got shapes 1 to 5, I've got tiles 1 to 5, it's reasonably easy to trace back. So I hope you found that useful, even if the result is not as pleasing as I'd hoped. And I will talk to you in another video.